Universal Watcher. Now we're going to see a type of report that's quite interesting because of these three reasons. First of all, it allows us to take multiple samples of data in one unique process. So if I have a process with a loop, as in this example here, each time the flow goes through this loop, I could take a sample of data. That means that not only I can see the real data that I have in the moment in which I'm checking the report, but I can see data of other moments in time in which we took a sample of data. This isn't a very common option. Most reports are only showing you real-time data or almost real-time data. This report here is going to show you data whenever you took the sample of that data. So that's a very interesting feature. Now, the data that we display in this report can also be highlighted in red. So I can create conditions. I can say, well, if the status is an alarm, I want it to be highlighted in red. If the temperature is over 100, I want it to be highlighted in red. If the power is over 400, I want it to be highlighted in red. So when we access the report, we're going to see these values in color red. Besides, we can look for the information or wait for the system to send it to us. We're going to see that not only can we go and access the report, but we can make this report push the information towards us. So we don't really have to wait. All we have to do is set up some conditions. And if those conditions are met, the data is going to be sent to us via email, via app, or through the portal. Now I'm going to enter the application and I'm going to show you an example of how this report works. First of all, any user can access the report by clicking here on reports and creating their own Universal Watcher report. This is a little bit dangerous because, as I mentioned, this report allows you to take samples of data in a process. So you could create hundreds or thousands of samples during one unique process. This is something an administrator is going to want to control. So although I can create a Universal Watcher report from this option here as a normal user, an administrator can always go to Structure and check and see all the Universal Watcher reports that any user has ever created for themselves. Besides, we're going to see that we can add some limitations to the amount of data that's stored in these reports. So I'm just going to open an existing Universal Watcher report so we can see it, and afterwards I'll explain how it's created, how it's configured. So first of all, I'm going to enter the configuration. I'll go here, I'll open the report, and here basically we can see we can create a grid. That would be the columns that we can create and add to the grid. Here we're going to indicate when we're going to take the sample of data. Here we're going to indicate the limits. And down here we're going to indicate who is going to receive the information if we want to push the information to someone. Okay, so this is very quickly explaining how we're creating this report, but I'll enter more in detail later. So once it's created, we can go here as a normal user to reports. I go to my queries and I can open this Universal Watcher report. Obviously, if I created it for myself, I can also modify it. So I'm going to enter, and here we can see the result. We've taken 2 samples of data from 2 different processes of the same class. Here's the grid that we built. And besides, here we can see one of the conditions was met, so the data is appearing in red. Anyways, this would be the result of the report when we go and access it, when we go and look for the information, but we could also make the system push this information towards us. Now I'm going to go back to the configuration. We're going to see how we configure this more in detail. And I'm also going to show you how we can push this data when certain circumstances or conditions are met. So I'm going back to Structure. I'm going to configure the report from here. The first thing I do is click here and add view. I'd give it a name. I'd select a class of process. And once I've done this, I'll click continue. Now, once I click continue, the first thing I need to do is indicate when am I going to capture the data. So here I can say, well, I want to capture the data when the flow goes through this outlet here in this DX gateway. So I'll look for DX1. That connects with the 1K2. That would be this connection over here. Now this is the moment in which we're going to take a sample of data. Now we have to set up some limits to the amount of data samples that we're going to take. For example, I could say I only want 1 register, or I only want 100 registers. So that would be a limit. Every time I have 100 registers, when the new register pops in, the last one would disappear. That means that the maximum amount of registers that I'm going to have in this report is 100. Or I could set it up to be a certain amount of days. For example, maybe during 7 days or hours. And I could also indicate an end date. This end date is always going to be filled in by default. So if we don't change it, it's going to stop taking samples. Now, once we've indicated when we want to take these samples and what are the limitations of the amount of samples we want to take, this is especially important for performance. We don't want our database to get huge because everyone's creating hundreds of samples every day. So the next thing we have to do is create as many columns as we want for our report. So we can add panel fields. For example, I could click here. I could select the field. It's called material. I can call it whatever I want. For example, item. I'm not going to explain this for now. I'll come back to this later. So I'll save and exit. And I'll continue creating my grid. I could also add connection details, mathematical formulas. So maybe I want to know the VAT or the tax. So I can add a price field. I don't know if I have any. I don't. Anyways, I could add a numeric field, make a multiplication, add something else. So I can add these calculated values to my grid. And I could do the same thing with dates. So I could click here on add a time formula. And maybe I could add a name like process duration. And then I could calculate periods between dates. I could click here on next. Here I could indicate that I'm going to measure things in natural hours or in natural minutes, for example. And I'm going to start counting from the beginning of the process until a certain connection. For example, when the flow goes through this personal task back to this gateway. So this is the amount of time I want to measure in natural minutes. I'll click save and exit. And now I have a new column in my report that would give me this information. Now I would continue creating all these columns for my report. I'm going to go back to the one I already created. So I'm going to delete this. Okay, so here I have several columns already created. And down here, I can indicate who's going to receive this information. There's 2 different ways of receiving the information. One way would be transmitting the data in a certain point of the process. So here I'm saying when the flow goes through K3 to 1TP1, that's when I want to transmit the data. So K3 would be this object up here, and 1TP1 would be this object over here. So it's page 1, TP1. That means that in this moment, I'm going to start transmitting the data. Now here I can indicate what data I want to transmit, all of the data or only the alerts. In order to send only alerts, I have to mark these as alerts. We can see there's 2 of them that have been marked as alerts. We'll go back in there and see how this is marked later. So in this scenario, we're just saying I want to transmit all the data under these conditions. So I could set up some conditions here. And when I transmit this data, I want to transmit this text too. And I want to transmit this data to these people. So here I can select, I could click here. I could say, how do I want to notify? Via email, via portal. I could even notify the same person via email, portal, or app. And once I've done this, each time that the conditions are met, although here there's no condition, so it's always going to inform when the flow goes through these objects. Well, it's going to notify this person. Now, how do I set up alarms for these different fields? When I enter any of these columns, I can mark this option that's called alert. Now, if I mark it, I can set up some conditions. This means that it's going to be an alert when these conditions are met. So in order for this to be an alert, these conditions have to be met. For example, here in the conditions, we indicated that the material has to be equal to photocopier. That's our condition. So if this condition is met, this bit of data is going to appear in color red. Besides, I can mark this option. It says immediate notification of alerts during the data generation. That means that as soon as I took the sample, I want to immediately notify someone. And here I can indicate the text. For example, if it's going to be a photocopier, I can indicate here new photocopier request. Now, it's going to notify me each time a new photocopier request has been made. And when is it going to notify me of this bit of data, of this alert? It's going to notify me as soon as the sample was created. So between the TP1 and the DX. So as soon as the flow enters this thread here, I'm going to be notified. I'm going to change this. Well, it's okay like this. I want 30 registers. Okay, so we've already seen how to set up an alert. I've actually got more alerts. Here I have another one. Here I have the condition, the alert. In this case, I don't want to notify anyone. Now, I'm going to test this process now that I already set up an alert. Besides, I'm going to push the information. We've indicated that we want to push the information whenever it's a photocopier. Although here we have another time alert and we don't want to push the information to anyone. And down here, we're always going to push all of the information to this user, to AP1. Okay, so I'm going to test this report. The first thing we want to do is create a new process. In order to create a new process, I'm going to my tasks, start process, and here I'll select the star message event. And I'm going to select a certain material. Let's see, we had one where I had a condition. I think it was, actually I'm not seeing the photocopier here. So I'm going to change the condition. This way I won't have to change the star message event. So I'll select a keyboard. I'll save and exit. That means when I select a keyboard, that condition is going to be met. So I'll select one. I'll send the request, and this is going to an approval. We can see the approval here. This is process 16. I also receive a notification, but this is a normal notification that is added in the diagram. Let me show it to you so we make sure. So as soon as the process is triggered, this notification is delivered, and then the flow goes to the approver. That's why when I enter here, I can see this notification. I'll just finish it. And I know my process is process 16. This is the test I just launched. And we're requesting a keyboard. So the condition we set up here in the material column is that when the item is a keyboard, this value has to appear in red, and we want to immediately receive a notification with this information. And I want to receive the notification when the data is generated. That's between this personal task and this gateway. That means as soon as this performer, this supervisor, finishes the task, we're going to receive the notification. I'm going to say yes. Well, I'm going to say I don't approve. And I'll submit. Now, immediately afterwards, I'm receiving the task and the notification. Why am I receiving the task? Because the flow went this way. I'm also the requester, so I'm also receiving this task. But besides, I'm receiving this push notification from Universal Watcher. So here we can see process 16. I have my task, and I also have this notification. If I enter, we can see it's sending me this unique bit of data. Okay, so new, well, here it says new photocopier because I didn't really change that. I can change that here. Now next time it's going to tell me new keyboard request. So here I have my notification. And as I mentioned, I can receive it via app, via portal as I'm receiving it now, or via email. Okay, so I'm going to finish it. And now this requester is going to decide whether he wants to reprocess his request or maybe he doesn't. When is all the data going to be transmitted? We can see here, all the data is going to be transmitted when it goes from K3 to this personal task here. So the flow would have to go this way. And when it enters this task again, that's when the data is going to be transmitted or delivered to these recipients. So I'm going to say I do want to reprocess, so the flow goes this way. And we're going to see that as soon as I reprocess, we're going to receive a notification with all the data of this process. So I'll go here, I'll say yes, I want to reprocess. I'll submit. Now, we just received the approval task again, but we also received the notification. And it's giving me all the information of the report, like the material, the requester, if it's been approved, the time that it took, comments, and so on. Okay, this notification has the information of one loop of this process, but I'm going to make the flow go through this loop again. So I'm going to finish this here. I'm going to enter the process, the task of my process 16. I'm going to say I don't want to approve. So the loop happens twice. I'm going to submit. And once more, I'm going to receive the task and the notification with that unique bit of data. So I'll finish the notification. I'll enter the task and I'll say I do want to reprocess, so I can receive all the information again. So I'll click on submit. Here I received the supervisor's task, and now here I received the notification. And now in the notification, since there's been 2 loops in the process, I received the information twice. So if any bit of data changed, for example, the comments or whatever changed in one of these loops, I would see it here in the report. Now, if I go here to reports and I enter the report on my queries, I can see all the information that's being stored here in the report. And besides, I can see that certain conditions are met. So there's an alert here. That's why it's appearing in red. Besides, I can see that this process, we actually took 2 samples of this process. Why? Because the loop happened twice. If the loop happens 100 times, it would have taken 100 samples, or as many samples as it can before it reaches a certain limit that I entered here. So this is how we create a universal watch report. This is the, let's say, the basics in order to create one of these reports. If you want more information, we can always access the documentation in the knowledge base. Exercise 402, part 3.